Om Parthaya Pratibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gradhidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Radavashinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusantadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marudastunyandi Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangapada Panishadai Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyendiyam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suraganah Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We are now discussing the 19th verse of the 6th chapter, Dhyana Yoga of Bhagavad Gita. In the last class, we discussed in the 18th verse, Yada viniyadam chittam atmanneva vadisthade nispraha sarvakamebhyo yukta ityuchyade tada. That is when we are able to control our mind completely, and when the mind sits, when it remains established in the Atman, then that state is called yoga, and it is completely free from all desires. In this 19th verse, there is a simile used by Lord Krishna. It's a metaphor in which the self-controlled mind of a yogi is compared to a lamp that is kept in a place which is totally free from any disturbance. When a burning lamp, with the flame flickering, is kept in a windy spot, the flame flickers, it is unsteady. But when it is kept in a windless spot or a place, any spot which is sheltered from winds, then the lamp doesn't flicker. So that is the simile used. Yatha deepo nivatastho nengade sopama smrda Yogino yatachittasya injado yogamatmanaha. So the Niruddha state of a yogi is discussed. We already discussed the states of mind, how the mind is sometimes disturbed, how it sometimes becomes overjoyed, elated, and sometimes it goes to the opposite direction. Mood swings between depression and elation. This frequently happens to normal people. There is nothing abnormal in it. But a yoga is a spiritual practice that should help us to keep our mind steady in both pain and pleasure. So, in the Patanjali's analysis of human mind, as expounded by Vyasa in his Bhashya, mind is sometimes called Chittam. The Chittam is called something Vikshiptam, Mudham, Vikshiptam, Ekagram or Niruddham. The Kshipta state is naturally restless. It's not able to concentrate on anything. This frequently happens to people. Endless thought currents come one after another. Anxiety and worry and concerns. Frequently about things that are totally, absolutely imaginary. Our concerns and anxieties sometimes are frequently without any real justification. Sometimes we get anxious. When we become anxious about something in the normal manner, then it doesn't create any strain. When we become worried about something which requires extreme concern, which may naturally produce a lot of anxieties, that anxiety doesn't produce any strain for the mind. When we become too much concerned about things, that concern also doesn't produce too much strain. But when a person becomes too much concerned, too much anxious about anything, then most of that anxiety and worry and concerns do not have any rational basis. That creates terrible strain. So that is the situation, that is the condition of a person whose mind is in Kshipta state or Mudha state, where it becomes inactive somewhat, but still it is totally restless and incapable of any concentrated effort. Vikshipta state is a state where mind sometimes gets concentrated, sometimes it gets completely dissipated. It becomes distracted. This is natural for common people. But when you start practicing yoga or any spiritual practice like meditation, naturally the mind becomes less and less unsteady. The wavering decreases and it becomes more and more steady. And at an advanced state, it is called Ekagra and Niruddha stage, the highest state that is actually discussed in this 19th verse. Yatha Deepo Nivatastho. So Nivatastha Deepa means a lamp that is kept in a sheltered place where the storms, the strong winds blowing around do not disturb the flame. The flame remains steady, undisturbed. So that is the metaphor used here. That's Yogi. So he says, Nengade sa upama smrta. That mind, it remains steady, it doesn't flicker. Now, when a person practices concentration, yatachittasya yoginaha, when a person practices concentration, when he reaches the level of Niruddha state, for such a yogi, what happens, he is completely in control of his mind and he is fully concentrated in his own Atman. So that is the literal meaning of it. Now, there are a few very important messages here. Yatha Deepo Nivatastha. It means it's a lamp that is kept in a sheltered place. But that is not always true. The lamp is not always kept in a sheltered place. It is kept in an open place where there is strong winds are blowing around, challenges, problems, internal strifes, internal concerns and worries and anxieties without any cause. That's the meaning here. See, if you have lost your job, you are anxious to get a new job. That is not mentioned. That's not what is implied here. Suppose a person becomes unnecessarily, without any reason, gets worried, when he is fighting with his own emotions and feelings and memories and impressions coming from God knows from where, from the past, and he loses his control, he loses his ability to concentrate on anything. That kind of strong winds, storms, thunderstorms blowing around, what happens, the flame of the lamp will start flickering, wavering, and even the lamp may be put out. That could happen. So how to face these storms blowing around? So that is the real subject of discussion in the 6th chapter. So very often in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras and many different meditative techniques recommended in many different Eastern religious traditions, you should have a higher ideal. You should have something to do, something that should occupy your mind and your senses in a healthy fashion. This is as important for the mind as for the senses. Senses also, unemployed senses. When senses don't have anything to do, no job to do, it actually drags the mind away from itself and scatters it everywhere, and mind then flows outside through the 5 senses, which act as doors through which the mind flows out. The eyes will catch different visual objects and will drag them to the mind. The ears will be attracted towards different objects by hearing. The skin, the sense of touch also can be a source of trouble, dragging the mind towards various objects. The sense of smell, the sense of taste, all these 5 senses will be dragging the mind towards various objects, really speaking. So that creates the storms, the thunderstorms, that will slowly make the lamp flicker. Mind begins to waver, as mentioned in the 2nd chapter. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangaste shubhajayate sanga samjayate kama krodho bhijayate krodhat bhavati sammoha smriti vibhrama smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranasyati. That's how the mind gets completely scattered, disturbed. We go on thinking about certain things because the eyes catch certain objects, the ears catch certain objects. So also the other senses of perception, maybe the sense of smell, the sense of taste, all these will catch something and bring that object to the mind, and then mind will go after it. It doesn't get everything that it is chasing, that it is pursuing, and then when it doesn't get everything it is looking for, that mind gets bitter, it becomes angry, disappointed, and slowly it loses its balance. So that's why the Lord Krishna uses this very powerful simile, Nivadastha Deepa. The yogi's mind should be like a mind that is kept in a windless spot. Does it mean that we should sit somewhere in a corner without doing anything? Now the whole idea can be challenged from a different perspective. Is it possible to practice this when we are surrounded by different duties, different conflicting situations, challenges and demands, professional demands, the demands on our mind and body? We had to do a lot of things, we had to concentrate on many things. Is it possible to practice this kind of concentration in the midst of our day-to-day activities in this modern 21st century? That's a big question. So it is possible. That's what Lord Krishna is going to explain in the coming verses. It is possible. Vedanta gives a powerful message in this context. And that message is simple. All that we find around us which may distract the mind away from its state of concentration, all these should be clubbed together as something of lesser importance, including our professional obligations and duties and work that we do, the job we do. Not that we should not do that, but the point is, they all constitute part of this continuing game of human life. And it should be done, we should do our work, we should do our duty, we should look after our responsibilities, obligations, no doubt. But remember, there is something beyond that, and that is of primary significance. That's why Vedanta divides reality into two fundamental things. One is the absolutely real and the absolutely unreal and the relative. The relative and the absolutely unreal are only two sides of the same coin. In reality, the absolute reality is the only reality. Everything else is changing. So whatever is subject to changes in the past, present and future, and the technical language of Vedanta, whatever is changing in the three states of our awareness or consciousness, in waking state, in dream state and deep sleep state, that is not absolute reality, it is only relative. So if we can look upon all the distracting experiences or all distractions and dissipations as part of the changing phenomena that we have to live with, that we have to interact with, but they constitute only the relative, not the absolute reality. But the absolute reality is something that is transcendental. In Vedanta we call it Brahman or Atman, that's our true nature. When we realize our true nature, then we realize the relativity of the relative. Then we will realize the changeable nature of the changing phenomena. Then we will be able to keep our mind focused on that absolute reality. And then when the mind is focused on that absolute reality, that is Atman, then it doesn't flicker. It will remain undisturbed, like a lamp kept in a windless spot. So that is the answer coming from Vedanta. Now we should remember certain important things here. This requires a different kind of skill. The skills that we normally use or develop in dealing with the external phenomenal world, in dealing with this relative world, they are not sufficient. We should be able to look beyond the empirical. We should be able to look beyond the world of the senses. That's why in the Kathopanishad there is an interesting metaphor which is as powerful a metaphor as the one that we discuss now. So it's a kind of imagery, the chariot imagery. So the Kathopanishad mantra tells you that if you are riding a chariot and if your horses are not fully trained or controlled, then you won't reach your destination and your life will be a failure because you won't reach your goal, you won't reach the place you are planning to go. So, Atmanam Radhinam Vidhi, Shariram Radhamevacha, Buddhim tu Saradhim Vidhi, Mana Pragrahamevacha, Indriyani Paranyahu, Vishyansteshu Gocharan, Atmendriya Manoyuktam Bhoktetyahur Manishinaha. It's a famous verse, two verses in the Kathopanishad. So, we are the one traveling in a chariot. Our intellect, our intelligence, which is rational, which is intelligent actually, intellect, intelligence, that is the rider, the intellect, the buddhi. And the horses are the senses. And the senses are controlled by the mind. And that mind is again controlled by the intelligence, buddhi. So we should first of all have a sensible person to drive the chariot, who can control the horses, the senses, using the mind which corresponds to this range with which the driver of a chariot will control the horses. So, if the horses are under control, well disciplined, well trained, and if they are under the control of the driver of the chariot, who can control the horses with the mind that is completely listening to the directions of the driver, the buddhi, and if that driver himself is a very intelligent, sensible person, then your journey will be fruitful. But suppose the horses are not fully within the control of the driver of the chariot, the chariot itself is broken. Chariot, he means our body is a chariot. The horses are the senses. The reins with which the driver controls the horses is the mind. So what is necessary is there should be a sensible driver. The mind, the intelligence, the buddhi should be sensible. The mind should be sensible, should be capable of controlling the horses when it is properly handled by the driver. And the horses should be well trained. Then what happens? We will reach our destination. Otherwise, what happens is we will not reach our goal. Not only that, the journey will end up in a tragedy. So, our whole journey can be compared to a lamp that is kept in a place. If the place is sheltered from strong winds, from storms blowing around, then the lamp will be steady. But if it is not sheltered properly from the storms blowing around, then the lamp will be put out. That's the idea behind. So, this discussion continues in the coming verse. Yatro paramade chittam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaiva atmanatmanam pasyin atmani dushyati. So when the mind is completely controlled, restrained by the practice of concentration, then it attains quietude, tranquility and peace. And then the person will be able to see the Atman by the Atman. And what happens? He attains a peculiar kind of inner quietude and tranquility and peace. Pasyan Atmani Tushyati. He becomes completely Tushyati, satisfied, not in a superficial sense. He reaches a level of inner tranquility and peace that he won't be looking for anything else. Complete contentment. In fact, that is the reward of all spiritual practices. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are storms we have to confront coming from within ourselves. There are storms that we have to confront coming from outside, from inside and also outside. External problems, external circumstances can create these thunderstorms that can blow away the lamp that is burning in front of us. Storms coming from within our own mind, anxieties and worries, can also disturb the lamp. Sudden elation and sudden depression. When something painful happens, painful need not necessarily be real, but it may be imaginary. experience that could create this problem. It is called in the coming verses dukkha samyogam, means link to dukkha. And dukkha samyoga viyogam is the goal of yoga, means freedom from dukkha samyoga, freedom from this connection to dukkha, means freedom from dukkha. So that we discuss in the coming verses. But in this verse, in 20th verse, a very interesting point is made here. What's the interesting point? Pashyan atmani tushyati. Yatra chaiva atmana atmanam pashyan atmani tushyati. Such a yogi, through concentration, is able to see the Atman by the Atman, and is able to recognize his own reality, his own true identity as that Atman. That's why Shankaracharya in his commentary says, Yatha deepaha pradipo nivadasto nivade vadavarjide dese sthido na inkade na chaladi. So he says, it doesn't move. That's what Shankaracharya says. The lamp, it's the flame of the lamp, it doesn't move when it is sheltered from storms. Otherwise it moves in one direction and moves in another direction. When dukkha comes, it moves in one direction. When sukha, when something painful happens, in one direction. When something enjoyable happens, it moves in the opposite direction. Sa upama umiyate anaya iti upama. So Bhashyakara says, those who understand the subtle nature of human mind, that's why, yogajnaihi chitta prachara darshibhihi. So the whole simile of comparing a yogi's mind with a lamp kept in a windless spot, Shankaracharya says, that's how the great ancient sages who understand the subtle nature of human mind explains how a yogi's mind remains steady and stable. Storms may be blowing around, but yogi's mind is immune to them. It doesn't associate with the storms. That's how it happens. Of course, the physical example of a lamp kept in a stormy spot, we can understand. But how does our mind react to storms from within our mind and also coming from outside? It is looking towards something that is beyond pain and pleasure. So the storms at the internal level and external level can be divided into two categories, the painful and also the pleasant. There is also storm. The tendency to get elated suddenly is as dangerous as the tendency to get depressed. If a person gets depressed suddenly, if he attaches himself to a painful situation, then after some time he will attach himself to a pleasant situation. Both are equally harmful. So yogi's mind is looking at something that goes beyond pain and pleasure. So it remains steady. It remains undisturbed. In the 21st verse, Lord Krishna is making the very powerful statement this here. What is the real joy? The real joy is something that goes beyond joy. And it goes beyond sorrow also. The real joy is something that transcends, that goes beyond what we normally understand as an enjoyable, a joyful situation or a happy situation. That is a real joy. That is a permanent joy. That the real capital, our capital joy. It is called Atyantikam Sukham in the language of the great teacher of the Gita. So that's why in the 21st verse we find Sukham Atyantikam yattat buddhigrahim atintriyam. That is the real infinite bliss which is perceived by a yogi that goes beyond senses. And in that respect, that goes beyond all our normal faculties. So that infinite bliss that is experienced by a yogi, by his mind. What is that mind? It is a purified mind. The normal mind can only experience joy, empirical joy. That is a fleeting experience, immediately followed by empirical sorrow. Two sides of the same coin. The normal human intellect, the normal human mind, it only understands joy in a superficial empirical sense. So you get something, you're happy. You find that something that you wanted is happening, you're happy. But that mind that is seeking that kind of happiness will immediately become unhappy, because the happy situation cannot continue for too long in the empirical world. So the absence of something that makes you happy will make you unhappy. The absence of something that makes you happy now will make you unhappy next moment, because it is changing. So it will be absent after some time. It means you are doomed to be, if you are happy now, you are doomed to be unhappy next moment at the worldly level, at the empirical level. But there is another kind of happiness, joy or Sukham. It is called Atyantikam. I mean the transcendental joy, the infinite bliss. It is something that goes beyond the perception or the cognition by the mind or intellect. It is a feeling that comes to us when we get something, when we find something is happening, and then you feel a kind of inner completion, an inner fulfillment, a self-enrichment. It cannot be explained. It cannot be written about. You cannot explain in words. It is something that can only be experienced. And that is the joy, that bliss that everyone is seeking. That's according to Vedanta. Every person is seeking lasting, permanent, continuous happiness. But unfortunately, without being aware of it, they are always chasing the impermanent, momentary, changing happiness. They think they will get permanent happiness, but they always get impermanent happiness. They eventually find out that the happiness they got is impermanent, because immediately the happy situation changes and happiness sets in. Vedanta helps us to search for the transcendental happiness. And we get it only when we develop a mind, an attitude that helps us to look at happiness and unhappiness with the same mind, with the same manner, with the same equilibrium of mind. So that you are not elated when something happy happens, and you don't become depressed when something unhappy happens. So mind is in a state of a permanent steadiness, where it is immune to empirical happiness, it is immune to empirical unhappiness. It doesn't understand sorrow, it doesn't understand temporary worldly happiness. So it is always in a state of real happiness, that is permanent happiness. It is called Atyantikam Sukham. It's a kind of transcendental feeling of inner enrichment. A feeling, well, I have got something. I don't have to look for anything else. In fact, this was what a Buddha got, a Christ got. This is what all great spiritual teachers got. You find, maybe if you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, if you read the reminiscences of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, you find that Sri Ramakrishna was actually enjoying every moment of his life. But he had to go through all kinds of challenges as everyone else. But he was always an embodiment of this transcendental bliss and happiness. That's what you find from the reminiscences of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, both monastic disciples and also non-monastic disciples. So that is what happens to a person who connects with this transcendental spiritual experience. It is called Sukham Atyantikam Yattad Buddhigrahyam Atintriyam. It goes beyond the reach of the senses, and it can be experienced only when our mind ceases to be the mind, when the mind merges with Atman, then becomes the purified buddhi, intellect. Then it experiences this. Veti yatra na jaivayam siddhasaladi tattadaha. So that you atmaneva atmana tushta sthita prajnatadochide. You find in the Gita, in the second chapter. Who is sthita prajna? The one who is tushta, who is contented. It is not just joy. You reach a level of infinite, inexplicable inner enrichment. You reach a state where you don't feel the need to look for anything else. You don't feel the need for going in search of anything else. So Shankaracharya says, Sukham Atyantikam Atyantameva Bhavati iti Atyantikam Anandam ityarthaka, infinite. That's meaning, this infinite blissfulness. Yattad buddhigrahyam buddhya eva indriya nirapekshaya grihyate iti buddhigrahyam. What it means is, it is experienced by buddhi, but buddhi or intelligence doesn't require senses to experience this inner bliss. It is extrasensory. It is an extrasensory experience. Indriya gocharatidam avishayajanitam ityarthaka. So that's why it goes beyond, it transcends anything that we experience at the sensory level. So, in fact, from a psychological point of view, every person in this world is actually looking for some happy experience that is everlasting. He knows that what he gets is not everlasting only when he gets it. And then he looks for something else, thinking that that new object will give him lasting satisfaction. But that also doesn't give him any lasting, any permanent satisfaction. Then he goes after something else. This infinite chasing after things under the impression that it will give satisfaction that is permanent, that is at the root of all painful experiences. According to Buddhism, it's called Trishna, desire. And Lord Krishna says, this infinite bliss is not non-attainable. It is perfectly within our reach. Only we have to take our search for that infinite bliss to a different level. We have to begin our search at a level that goes beyond the senses and beyond mind. So of course, in the Upanishad you find this Panchakosha Vichakshana. This Sukham, this Atyantikam Sukham is sometimes compared to Anandamaya Kosha. Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, Anandamaya Kosha. In 5 sheets, we identify ourselves as something at the material level, Annamaya Kosha, at the level of vital energy, Pranamaya Kosha, as a psychological entity, that is Manomaya Kosha, as something that goes even beyond the mind, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and beyond all the 4, we identify ourselves with this Anandamaya Kosha. But beyond this, there is the Brahmanandam, the real spiritual experience of our total identification with the Brahman. That's the highest experience. So, but anyway, even a search for this higher truth, this higher infinite bliss, will give us some degree of joy and satisfaction. That is something very interesting and very important for us to remember. In fact, that is the very relevance of spiritual ideas in modern world. Even if you do not get it, even if you have this idea in your mind and make some effort, not always successful, but if you make an effort in this direction, then eventually you will reach that goal. Not in this life, maybe some other life. In the Gita, that discussion comes later. Arjuna puts his question. Well, I'm going after this Atyantikam Sukham, and did a lot of prayer and meditation and japa, reading holy scriptures, spend long hours in meditation and other spiritual disciplines. But I don't feel I have attained anything. There are many people who will tell you, so many years they were struggling, they didn't get anything. So does it mean that God is unreal or the spirituality is unreal? Not at all. So Arjuna put this question to Krishna. So he says, Ayadi Saddhayopedo Yoga Charidamanasaka Aprapi Yoga Samsiddhim Kam Gatim Krishna Gechadi. What is the fate? What is going to happen to the person who makes a lot of efforts in this world, in spiritual life, but who fails to attain anything and he dies? Does it mean that one life gone waste? Lord Krishna says absolutely no. And Arjuna continues he pushes forward his thesis again. Is life completely a waste if you don't attain anything? Kachinno ubhaya vibrashta chinna brahmivanasyadi apradishto mahabahu vimudho brahmanapadi. In the same 6th chapter, these verses will occur later. After some days we will discuss that. So Arjuna is asking this question which many people will ask. If we don't get anything immediately or in this life, quickly, then does it mean that it is non-attainable? Lord Krishna says absolutely not. Arjuna is asking, all the efforts will go waste like patches of clouds get scattered by strong winds in the sky. And then Lord Krishna says, no. Whatever little spiritual practices we do in this world, in this life, it may be just a few years of unsuccessful effort to meditate, some effort to go to a library and take a good book on spiritual subject and read it. You read just for a few days, then you stop reading, you started reading something else. Or maybe you meditated, for some years you practiced meditation. Lord Krishna says, that little practice you have done, or even the desire to practice, will create a tendency in you, and that is a spiritual bank balance. That tendency becomes your spiritual wealth that you inherit, that you will inherit when you are born again. Tatratam buddhi samyogam labhade paurodehikam yatadeja tato bhuyasam siddhu kurunantana. Lord Krishna says, even if you don't attain much in this life, you are not going to lose anything. You are never late. When you are born again, the reward of what you have done, what little spiritual practice you have done in this life, you will inherit as maybe the bank balance left in the bank by your forefathers. It will be yours when you can operate when you get the inheritance. Like that, we inherit our own spiritual capital. It doesn't go to anyone else. Other things we may lose. Your father's, grandfather's property, buildings, estates you may lose. But the good things you have done in this life, or at least the desire to do good things, you will inherit that reward. And you won't lose it. No one can take it away from you. So Lord Krishna says, Tatradam buddhi samyogam labhade paurodehikam. You will be born with your mind, buddhi, this intellect, antakarana, full of those samskaras. And those samskaras will help you to connect with your previous spiritual efforts. And will help you to continue your spiritual journey further forward from where you left in your previous life. So, of course, this belief is linked to the doctrine of law of karma and the doctrine of reincarnation or rebirth. So, that is an important message that comes in the 6th chapter. 6th chapter is very famous for these verses. The Lord Krishna gives a big promise. The promise is, don't worry, you won't lose anything. It doesn't mean that we can neglect or we become indifferent or we have enough time, so no need to hurry. Not at all. What it means is, there is no need for anyone to fear that what he has done, what spiritual practices he has done, will not bear any fruit. They will bear their fruits. They will be there with you. That's your spiritual bank balance with which you will be born in your next life. And coming back to the next verse, Yam labdhva chaparam labham manyade nadhigam tataha yasmin sthidona dukkhena gurunabi vichalyate. So this verse continues. So after having attained this spiritual concentration, you will realize that there is no other acquisition superior to that. So that is actually the root of real contentment in spiritual life. When you feel that you have got something, and when you feel that there is nothing that is greater than what you already acquired to be achieved, that is the real, the foundation of real contentment, the lasting contentment. Not that we will stop doing our work or we stop making effort, not at all. What it means is, whenever a person feels that, well, he has not acquired anything, whenever the cause of pain comes, then what happens, this understanding, well, I have acquired something, which is a spiritual bank balance which I have built up in this life. And I am not going to lose that again. That is normal for any very spiritual seeker. But when a person really reaches the highest spiritual experience, the concentration, the yoga, what happens? Yasmin sthidona dukkhena gurunabi vichalyate. He won't be moved by any kind of sorrowful experiences. Because he feels that he has acquired something. Yam labdhva chaparam labham manyade nadhigam tataha. There is nothing greater than this. Nothing greater than what I have already acquired. Now, this could happen at two different levels. It can happen to a highest mystic, where he gets completely established in spiritual contentment and lasting permanent happiness. It could happen even to a beginner, because even a desire to do spiritual practice, even a humble attempt, even a desire to make a humble attempt will produce a vritti or samskara in our mental structure. That itself will be an amount you have deposited in the spiritual bank, and you have that wealth, and you will inherit that when you are born again. So in spiritual life, even if you are not able to practice spiritual disciplines physically, at a physical level, even if you develop a mind that feels, well, I must do something, that sankalpa, that thought at a mental level will produce a tendency, a vritti, a vasana, a samskara, a sankalpa. And that sankalpa, even the desire to pray, to meditate, to read holy books, to discuss and know more about spiritual ideas, even that humble desire will produce something that will give you a great reward when you are born again. Because from that desire, in your next life, you will fulfill that desire. In every person you find certain natural tendencies, what you call instinctive tendencies. In a same family, you won't find this common to everyone. Every person seems to be an island, a lonely traveler, a solitary traveler in his spiritual journey. So that's because he's bringing with him this baggage of previous samskaras, impressions. So if you have any desire to do spiritual practice in the previous life, that desire itself will manifest as an instinctive tendency to practice something. It will manifest as an attraction, as a fascination for spiritual ideas in this life. That's why Lord Krishna says, Tatradam buddhisam yogam labade paurodekikam. These tendencies coming from previous life, which are attached to your previous body, that's paurodekikam means. Your body is gone, the body in which you lived in your previous life, that's no more there, it's gone. But the tendencies that you have accumulated using that body in your previous life, those tendencies you inherit when you are born again, and those spiritual tendencies will help you to move forward in this life and continue your journey to a spiritual destination. So we will have the discussion of the next verse in the coming session. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.